Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I welcome you to another episode of the Islamic Dilemma. We are going to continue our discussion today concerning the identity of the angel Gabriel that supposedly have appeared to the Prophet of Islam, Muhammad. In my previous episode, I was joined here by a dear brother, Brother Daniel, who basically interacted with me in discussing the fact that was indeed Muhammad aware of the identity of this angel, and in other words, did he even know that this is an angelic being sent by God, or as we discussed, that Muhammad actually was terrified, he was confused about the identity of this being, and at some point even he thought that he himself, meaning Muhammad, was demonically possessed actually, and what he saw was not an angel, was actually a demonic spirit. And then we talked about the fact that Muhammad asked his wife, Khadija, to help him to understand if indeed what he saw was an angel, or if he was actually possessed by a demon spirit. And of course, the way it went, that his wife told him that the next time this being appears to him, to let her know, and then she conducted what we call the angelic test. And it's unfortunate that the test that was conducted is just a test that absolutely baffling to a human mind, that his wife will ask him to lie down, and he will put his head on one thigh and then will move around and lay his head on the other thigh, and then she lifted up her garment, and the fact that she stripped herself basically almost naked, and when that being disappeared after she lifted up her garment, her conclusion was that this has to be an angel, because only angels basically will not look at a naked woman. Ladies and gentlemen, we are dealing here with the issue of salvation. We are dealing here with the issue of your own eternal abode. This is not something that must be taken lightly. We showed in the last episode that a person by the name Zechariah, who was a priest in the temple, the story was mentioned in the Gospel of Luke chapter 1, starting from verse 11, and Zechariah is no other than Zechariah, who is the father of John the Baptist, known in the Qur'an and in Islam as the Prophet Yahya. And we showed that in the account of Luke, that when an angel appeared to Zechariah in the temple to pronounce to him that God heard Zechariah's prayer when he was asking God for a child, that those prayers have been answered, Zechariah was troubled when he saw this being, and that's expected. We are not denying the fact that if you see a being that apparently is an angel, and I don't know how angels look like, we just go by how they are described to us in the Bible at least the angel gave him a comforting statement, as the angels in the Bible always did, by stating to Zechariah, do not be afraid. In fact, the very same angel appeared later to Mary, the mother of Jesus, and told her the exact same thing, Mary, do not be afraid. So there was this comforting introduction that Muhammad apparently didn't receive, because Muhammad was terrified, and the angel actually did not give him this comforting statement, do not be afraid. Actually what the angel did is he hugged him very tightly in a way that Muhammad was actually troubled by it. And then we showed that Zechariah, the father of John the Baptist, questioned the angel when the angel told him that God heard your prayers, and I'm here to give you the good news that your wife will be pregnant with a child. Zechariah, of course, wasn't so sure if what he is hearing is real. He said, how would I know indeed that this is the case, because I am an old man and my wife is old of age also. That's when the angel told him, I am Gabriel, who stands in the presence of God, and there is a sign that you're not going to be able to talk now for the duration of the pregnancy. In other words, Gabriel immediately identified himself to Zechariah, who happened to be only a priest, just a human being like you and I, who wasn't a prophet, wasn't a messenger. He was just a priest who was serving at the temple. Yet when it came to Muhammad, that did not happen. In the case of Muhammad, actually, we find that Gabriel did not identify himself by name. In fact, when we study the Quran and we look at the chronological order of the revelation of the chapters where Gabriel's name was mentioned, we find that Gabriel's name was mentioned twice in the Quran. Both times happened to be in a Medinan chapters, meaning in two chapters that were revealed 13 years or more after Muhammad began his proclamation as a prophet for Islam. So this is something that we must ask ourselves, especially if you are a Muslim person who is taking this claim for granted that Muhammad indeed saw the angel Gabriel. Please ask yourself this question: how could it be that Muhammad did not know the name of his angel until 13 years later? Could this be true? Wouldn't you expect God to reveal the identity of this angel to his favorite prophet, to the seal of the prophets, so that he can give him comfort and assurance? Also, we must ask ourselves this question: if God, even according to the teaching of the Quran, spoke directly to Moses, the prophet of the Jews, according to the teaching of the Quran, and he also, according to the Quran, called the friend of Abraham, whom Muhammad claimed to be his father, his forefather, why didn't God speak directly to Muhammad, who is considered to be the seal of the prophets? Brothers and sisters, I truly ask you to consider these very important questions that deal with your own salvation. Today, I am going to continue with these challenges that I have presented to you. One of these challenges has to do with the standard that was followed, at least in the biblical account, of how God called his prophets and messengers. Muhammad claimed that he is one of the messengers and the apostles that were sent to mankind. In other words, he is claiming to be one of the prophets that were mentioned or preceded him. Now, we don't know all of their names, but the Quran at least gives us a list of certain names. The Quran calls Adam a prophet. The Quran calls Noah a prophet. The Quran calls Abraham a prophet, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph. All of the 12 sons of Jacob are called to be prophets. Yet, when we go to the Bible, we see that there is a list of prophets, some of whom maybe resemble the name that the Quran listed, and others we do not find at least a mention of them in the Quran. However, the issue is not the names. The issue is, if we would to go to the books of the prophets listed in the Old Testament of the Bible, and we would take a look at how God approached these prophets with a message, we are going to see that there is a pattern that was used with them, yet this pattern was completely the opposite when it came to Muhammad. I would like to direct your attention to the slide that I'm going to be showing right now. In this slide, I'm calling it the prophet's inauguration formulas, basically. For instance, let's take the prophet Isaiah. The prophet Isaiah, basically, in one of these multiple callings that he received, this one is found in chapter 1 of Isaiah, verse 1. It says, the vision of Isaiah. And then it's proceeded to say that this is the vision that Isaiah saw. And then there is a message, meaning Isaiah now has to deliver this message. In fact, if we go to Isaiah chapter 6, and I have a Bible with me here, and if you have a Bible or you don't have a Bible, I encourage you to look at one, whether physically or even online if possible, and go to Isaiah chapter 6, and we look, for instance, at verse 8. In Isaiah chapter 6, verse 8, Isaiah saw a vision of God seated in the temple, and not only just seated in the temple, but expanded from all the way from heaven to earth. And then he was terrified. And Isaiah immediately thought of himself to be a sinner, because no sinner can stand in the presence of a holy and just God. And then it says that an angel that was in the presence of the throne of God picked up a piece of burning coal in representation of basically burning the sin or at least atoning for the sin. And then he touched the lips of Isaiah and told him, there you go, now you are being ready to receive the message basically and to deliver the message, because the message of God is holy, and now your lips have been cleansed from the sin. And then we hear what happened after that. It says in verse 8, chapter 6, then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, whom shall I send? This is God speaking, saying, whom shall I send with a message that I have for my people? And then Isaiah responded and says, here am I, send me. Because Isaiah now was strengthened by the presence of God and felt that he can do it now that God has prepared him for the task. And then God told him a message, and he says, go and tell this people. When we look at the same encounter between Muhammad and this supposed angel, in fact, we wonder why didn't God himself speak directly to Muhammad when he spoke directly right now to Isaiah? Yet, we see that Muhammad was actually terrified. Muhammad didn't even get a message. The message that he received was a very awkward message. It says that, read. When we know that Muhammad doesn't know how to read. And the message says, read in the name of your God, the Creator, the God who created mankind from a blood clot. By the way, this is something that will be a discussion for another episode, but I want to direct your attention to the fact that blood clot is a dead tissue. You do not make babies from dead tissues, by the way. You need a live tissue. That's another issue that we have to deal with when it comes to the so-called perfect science of the Qur'an. But nevertheless, we're going to proceed now to the next verse, and it says, and read in the name of God who taught mankind by the pen. Well, you ask yourself this question. Why did God challenge Muhammad about something that has to do with reading and writing when Muhammad himself didn't know how to read or write according to the classical Islamic literature itself? Obviously, we have to ask ourselves this question. Nevertheless, I would like to point you back again to the same slide we looked at. We looked at the account for the prophet Isaiah. Now we're going to look at the second account, another example for the prophet Jeremiah. In the case of the prophet Jeremiah, in Jeremiah chapter 1, verse 1, we read this, the words of Jeremiah, and then proceeded to say, to whom the word of the Lord came. And then Jeremiah was given a task, a message, to go and deliver to the people of God. I want to go to the next slide. In the next slide, there is another example of another prophet listed in the Old Testament. This time, this prophet's name is Ezekiel. And the prophet Ezekiel's task was basically to warn the people of Judah, the southern kingdom in the Old Testament of Israel, the people of Jerusalem, that destruction is going to come toward Jerusalem by the Babylonians, that they need to be careful, that they need to heed the message. And this was the message, basically, that Ezekiel received. The word of the Lord came to Ezekiel, and then it was superseded by, there was a message that came after that. Let's look at another example. Another prophet listed in the Old Testament, his name is Hosea. In Hosea chapter 1, verse 1, this is the inauguration formula message that he received. The word of the Lord that came to Hosea. And then we look at another example, yet another prophet also called the prophet Amos. In Amos chapter 1, verse 3, it says, thus says the Lord. Ladies and gentlemen, these kind of inaugurational formulas are very important for us to see and analyze. As I mentioned to you in the beginning of this episode, there is a trend that was being followed, and this trend shows clearly that God was basically revealing his message in a very specific way. Yet unfortunately,